Young Turks, Cenk Uygur and Kasparian with you guys on what could be a lovely Monday evening. I think it's lovely because the polls look good. The election's about 2 weeks away. We got a presidential debate coming up on Thursday. Are you gonna watch it here? Of course you're gonna watch it here. Election night, where else would you go? We're also gonna have updates on progressive campaigns that almost no one else will have on election night. So make sure you tell everybody. And the folks who make that possible are you guys. So TYT.com/go is a campaign we've been doing all year, and it's gonna go to the end of the year and not beyond that. In terms of raising money from you guys so that our interests are connected with you, and you are the Young Turks. I don't know if we've got the thermometer. If we do, we'll show it to you guys here in a little bit. But meanwhile, I want to tell you also, remember guys, if you give $127, you get the awesome Press On t-shirt with a great TYT mic flag. I love wearing that around. Quick side note here, I was wearing the "Will You Shut Up Man" t-shirt yesterday around LA. That's from the Joe Biden quote from the first debate. I got 5 to 6 different times, and I'm not exaggerating at all, where people were like, "Your shirt, oh, that's so cool." Because they realized it was a Biden quote. That's shoptyt.com. And of course, at $1,000, you get to go on the donor wall and also have the Press On hoodie. Last thing is, guys, 2,500 and above, we'll love you forever. Plus, you get to name something in the studio. If you want to know what you could name in the studio, tyt.com/press on. Press On gives you the list of things that you could name. Anyways, big show ahead, insane things exposed, if you will. Anna, take it away.
Well, yes, we have some really good news later in the show, so definitely stick around for that. But for now, let's talk about some updates to COVID. So Dr. Deborah Birx, she hasn't really been out in the public lately. And if you're wondering where she's been or whether or not she still has good relationships with Donald Trump, just know that much like Dr. Anthony Fauci, she's become increasingly frustrated with Trump, increasingly frustrated with the influence of Scott Atlas in the coronavirus task force, and has decided to essentially travel the country in an effort to educate state and local lawmakers and universities about the pandemic to, I guess, counteract some of the negative impacts coming from the Trump administration. But with that said, over the weekend, Scott Atlas, who is in no way a public health expert, but unfortunately has become a coronavirus advisor to Donald Trump, had tweeted some misinformation about mask wearing, and Twitter took it down. So Atlas wrote in a tweet posted Saturday, "Masks work? No," followed by a series of misrepresentations about the science behind the effectiveness of masks in combating the pandemic. Now, apparently Dr. Birx was relieved that Twitter took that tweet down. Birx also told friends, fighting the virus is hard enough without Atlas. She also suggested that the task force is frustrated by Atlas's ability to find obscure information, label it as data, and present it to the president as scientific evidence, an almost insurmountable challenge. If he likes the sound of it, meaning Donald Trump, he believes it, Birx said of Trump. And Birx has clearly had it with Donald Trump. In fact, Olivia Troy, who was a former coronavirus task force advisor who worked with Birx and is now a Trump critic, said White House officials grew irritated by Birx's detailed and data-heavy presentations in the early summer that showed emerging hotspots and difficulties getting the virus under control. Some officials rolled their eyes at Birx as she delivered a message that clashed with the administration's preferred narrative that things were improving. Though she retains the title of coordinator of the White House coronavirus response, Birx has not attended any of President Trump's press briefings. I'm sure many of you have noticed that on the pandemic since he started them anew in late July, nor has she been at recent events touting the administration's advances in testing. So again, she has really been traveling the country in an effort to educate, anyone who has any influence on this pandemic, in an effort to counteract some of Trump's disastrous rhetoric related to the pandemic, Cenk.
Yes, so there's a number of problems here. Number one, having her do the college circuit is basically banishing her to Siberia. She might have as much influence as Ben Shapiro on that college circuit, which is to say almost none at all. In fact, the Shapiros of the world might have more influence because their opinions get filtered up through the right-wing noise machine, and hers clearly do not. Look, the problem with going and talking to state governments and students basically one at a time is you're never gonna reach enough people in enough time. You need the media multiplier effect where everyone is talking about what you're saying. You can get that on television through those press briefings where everybody got to find out what was going on with coronavirus. Obviously, there was that legendary moment where Trump suggested injecting bleach into yourself to cure coronavirus and looked at Dr. Birx for approval, and Dr. Birx did not really give that approval. She had that consternation on her face that's now become famous and seemed mortified by the suggestion. Well, that appears to be when she started to lose influence. How dare you suggest that we shouldn't inject bleach into ourselves because it might work on table surfaces? I mean, that is how dumb the president is. And so obviously it's hard not to get frustrated by that. For her sake, she probably honestly on a personal level does not mind being banished, because otherwise you have to be in the White House and deal with the maelstrom that is Donald Trump and his insanity on a day-to-day basis. And it's impossible to do science and Trump at the same time. So you can't serve those two masters at once. And in fact, when talking about what needs to be done to protect the American people, there's of course a whole range of options: testing, contact tracing, masks, PPE, and of course vaccine at the end. And apparently the experts, a senior administration official told the Washington Post that they've decided other than waiting around for a vaccine, everything else is too hard. Let me give you the exact quote. They've, quote, this is from a senior administration official, someone inside the White House. They've given up on everything else. It's too hard of a slog. Oh, I'm sorry, were we inconveniencing you? Was it kind of problematic to try to help save American lives? Yeah, take a load off. Banish your doctors to Siberia and then only listen to kooks like Scott Atlas and then just don't do anything other than propaganda. And that really is Trump's strategy. It is abhorrent, and that is part of the reason why we lead the world in deaths, which now are in the ballpark of 220,000 dead Americans.
Yeah, you're right, Cenk. And if you look at countries that certainly did take the pandemic seriously from the beginning, their economies are starting to recover. So look, to be fair, it's mostly just China. And China did take a much more authoritarian approach in combating the virus, but their economy has opened back up. Businesses have opened back up. Consumer spending has increased. I'm sure it helps them quite a bit. That we rely on them for masks and other medical supplies. Unfortunately, we've outsourced all of those jobs and the manufacturing of those types of products, and so that's helped their economy as well. But my point in bringing that up is, if the Trump administration had taken the virus seriously from the beginning, if Trump refused to politicize it and refused to politicize mask wearing, we would be in a far better position today. And instead, as you mentioned, Trump has taken the path of essentially publicly scrutinizing the very public health experts that we need to rely on for accurate information. People like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who now is publicly feuding with Donald Trump, not because he wants to, but because things have gotten so bad and so tense in his relationship with Donald Trump. Trump took one of his comments out of context and used it in a campaign ad, and Fauci was furious about it because it appeared as though Fauci was lauding Donald Trump's response to coronavirus when that is not the case. During a recent interview with 60 Minutes, Fauci also shed some light on his thoughts regarding Donald Trump contracting the virus. Let's take a listen.
Were you surprised that President Trump got sick?
Absolutely not. I was worried that he was going to get sick when I saw him in a completely precarious situation of crowded, no separation between people, and almost nobody wearing a mask. When I saw that on TV, I said, oh my goodness, nothing good can come out of that. That's gotta be a problem. And then sure enough, it turned out to be a super spreader event.
Dr. Fauci also said it doesn't make any sense at all why President Trump equates wearing a mask with weakness. His very stark comments come as a serious concern grows over a very disturbing rise in coronavirus cases across the country. Just take a look at this map. Only 2 states in the U.S. are not reporting spikes. Those states, Missouri and Vermont. Yesterday alone, the U.S. reported more than 57,000 new infections. Worldwide, total cases are approaching 40 million.
Fauci also mentioned that Donald Trump is controlling what type of media appearances he can make, which is also disastrous because at this point, Dr. Anthony Fauci is really the only public health expert who's spreading accurate information to the American people. And in response to Fauci's efforts, of course, Donald Trump decided to say some pretty terrible things about Fauci in a call with his staffers. So Caitlin Collins from CNN reported that Trump said, "Fauci is a disaster. If I listen to him, we'd have 500,000 deaths," before later saying it would be 700,000 or 800,000. And then he said, "If there's a reporter on you, you can have it just the way I said it. I couldn't care less." So CNN was given access to that call by a source. He apparently knew that and was proud of the statements that he had for Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, gee, I wonder who is more likely to be right, Donald Trump or doctors and scientists. Okay, if you think that's a tough call, you're not paying attention or are not very bright. So let me do 2 more things here. First of all, why is he listening to Scott Atlas, who is not an infectious disease expert? He, as Birx said and Anna read to you in the beginning, if he likes the sound of it, he believes it. How do you like that for a president of the United States in the middle of a pandemic? Well, it doesn't have to be true. He just has to like the sound of it. Mark Lipsitch, director of Center for Communicable Disease Dynamics at Harvard, said, in other words, if your goal is to do nothing, then you create a situation in which it looks okay to do nothing, and you find some experts to make it complicated. In other words, the point of Scott Atlas is to manufacture doubt. This is a strategy that was first implemented by the tobacco companies, later picked up by the oil companies on the issue of climate change. You don't have to be right, you just have to manufacture doubt. So you bring in Scott Atlas, who has no expertise in this, and call him an expert, and then he manufactures doubt for you on masks, on testing, on contact tracing, on anything that would actually save American lives. Why? Well, look, part of it is Trump wants the market to rebound, and he's too unintelligent to realize that the best way for it to rebound is for us to get past coronavirus rather than going right into the thick of the disease and the storm. That only makes the markets worse. He's just too dumb to understand that. He's just trying to do propaganda and marketing to get past it. Because honestly, the only thing that's ever worked in his life, in his entire career, is propaganda and marketing. But you can't do that with a disease. And the second reason is because of this inexplicable thing that Fauci talked about, where he thinks it's unmanly to wear a mask. Why? Deep insecurities about his manhood. And again, lack of intelligence. Here, last couple of quotes here from Trump that tie that in perfectly. When talking about Scott Atlas, he said, first, in response to Savannah Guthrie at the town hall, Trump said, "I've heard many different stories on masks." Yeah, the one from all of the doctors and scientists and one from kook Scott Atlas, and he chose to believe the kook instead of all of the rest of the doctors and scientists in this country. To be fair, there's also the demon semen doctor, the Haitian lady that came out, etc. And he thinks maybe there's demon sperm, and Scott Atlas might be more right than 99.9% of doctors and scientists. Then in his rally, Trump said, quote, "Scott Adkins, if you look at Scott, Dr. Scott, he's great guy from Stanford, he will tell you." It's Scott Atlas.
No, it's amazing.
Not Adkins. He's the only guy you're listening to as an expert. You don't even know his name. You don't know it well enough to say it at a rally, but you say it anyway. And then he follows it up with, Guthrie says he's not an infectious disease expert. And Trump says, "Oh, I don't know. Look, he's an expert. He's one of the experts of the world." Oh, I see, he's an expert of the world. And so let's listen to him rather than infectious disease experts. It's hard to be this dumb, but he's gonna top it off. And I gotta give you one last Trump quote on this. He said at a rally Tuesday night in Pennsylvania, the vaccines are coming soon, the therapeutics, and frankly, the cure. All I know is I took something, whatever the hell it was, I felt good very quickly. I felt like Superman. You idiot, you're the president of the United States and you had coronavirus, something that has killed 220,000 Americans. You should know what the hell it was. He goes out there to rally. I don't know what the hell I took. Okay, what am I supposed to do? Educate you and protect you? What am I, the president? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I took a bunch of things and it made me feel great. You know why it made you feel great? Because one of the things you took was steroids, which artificially makes you feel great in the short term, and it actually impairs your judgment. But you had no judgment to begin with. So now we're left with a guy going, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I picked an expert of the world instead of an actual infectious disease expert. Who cares? You're the one dying, not me.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And Trump had lots of other insane things to say during another rally he had over the weekend in Nevada. So let's discuss that. So over the weekend, during a rally in Nevada, Donald Trump, who contracted coronavirus due to his own ignorance, decided to mock someone incredibly smart for following the science and not getting coronavirus. Here are his comments on Joe Biden.
If you vote for Biden, he will surrender your jobs to China. He will surrender your future to the virus. He's going to lock down. This guy wants to lock down. He'll listen to the scientists. If I listened totally to the scientists, we would right now have a country that would be in a massive depression. Instead of, we're like a rocket ship. Take a look at the numbers.
So in other words, the man who is standing before a crowd wearing hats manufactured in China wants to fearmonger about Joe Biden shipping jobs over to China. Okay, fair enough, but he'll listen to the scientists is a strange insult, especially at a time when 220,000 Americans have died during this pandemic because Donald Trump has refused to listen to the scientists. It's absolutely insane. I mean, Trump has this ability to take something that someone has done right and twist it into something awful. Like, Joe Biden, he's not a moron. He didn't get coronavirus like me. Let's make fun of him. He listened to the scientists. Oh my God. Okay. I mean, I can't imagine feeling proud to support someone like that. You got sick. You're out of commish because you got sick as the president of the United States, who's surrounded by people who are supposed to be protecting you. And I mean, like, he has limitless resources to stay safe. And he contracted the virus, and then he turns around and mocks a person who listened to the scientists and didn't get sick.
Yeah, so look, at this point, this is why I say, if you're still a Republican, you're actively and knowingly in the party of stupid. So don't pretend you're not. I know the rest of the media has to play patty cakes here and go, I can't tell who's more intelligent, the person who believes in science or the one that doesn't. Okay, try that with gravity and see how it turns out. No, there is a correct answer. So look, I know I used to be a Republican, and so why am I not a Republican now many years later? Well, a number of things happened. First, I found out that everything they do is marketing, and none of it is true. They never balance budgets. They don't care about the deficit. They don't know if they're for free trade, fair trade, no trade. They don't know anything, right? And I realized the whole point of the Republican Party is to funnel tax cuts to the rich and start more wars so defense contractors and oil companies and bankers can get more, to get richer, right? So now I've deciphered that, and it took me a little while. And so you could say, hey, Cenk, you should have figured it out earlier. Fair enough. And now I'm telling you, if you're still a Republican, what are you waiting for? Now, you used to pretend that you were the smart party. Oh, these liberals, they just act with their emotions and they don't know what they're doing and stuff. Now, your party is actively rejecting scientists. Biden, he'll listen to the scientists. Can you believe what a schmuck he is? He listens to scientists. Okay, I mean, you didn't listen to science on climate change. Originally, you didn't listen to science on tobacco, by the way. You don't listen to science when it comes to infectious disease, and the list goes on and on. So at what point do you realize, oh, I'm in the party that doesn't believe in science? What is science? It's a series of experiments to find out facts. It's not literature, it's not the arts, it's not debatable. In the beginning, as you do the experiments, it's perfectly debatable, and that's part of the point of science. By the end, you have reached some conclusions about facts, not about poetry, about facts. And here is the party saying, I don't give a damn about your facts. I'm not interested in experts or scientists or doctors. I am choosing to be the stupid party. So if you're still in that party, God, that's embarrassing. That's mortifying. Look, I'll just repeat real quick the last 2 quotes from Donald Trump. By the way, I could repeat 1,000 dumb quotes from Donald Trump, and you all know it, like injecting bleach into your body. If you weren't done with him at that point, again, there's something really wrong with you. When challenged on the fact that the only guy he listens to, Scott Atlas, is not an infectious disease expert, Trump said, oh, I don't know. Look, he's an expert. He's one of the experts of the world. So I don't listen to the scientists. I listen to experts of the world that are not an expert in the thing that I should be listening about. I mean, look, what would you call that smart? Is there anybody, if you're a MAGA guy, do you think, oh, that's smart, man? You don't want to listen to the experts on science or medicine. You want to listen to experts of the world that you don't know anything about. How do I know that? It's in the quote. He said, I don't know, okay? And he also said, about his own treatment on coronavirus, all I know is I took something, whatever the hell it was, it felt good very quickly, I felt like Superman. He himself says, I don't know what the hell I took, and my life was on the line. That's how dumb I am. And people go, oh yeah, that's my boy. Well, if that's your boy, then you're celebrating that the Republican Party has become an embarrassment that doesn't believe in science, medicine, or facts. And that's just the reality of it. Have at it, Hoss.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we have more news for you, including how the Federal Reserve is offering interest-free loans to companies that make a ton of money, but like to serve as loan sharks when it comes to cities and states. We have that for you and more when we return.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. So you guys saw a commercial during the break that I want to tell you about because it's our awesome TYT army that put it together. So it's the one with the 4 boxes, and you know that this is the reality anyway in life. Fox News does the right wing, CNN is so-called centrist, MSNBC does corporate Democrats, but there is no channel for progressive Democrats other than us, and progressives that are independents as well. And so we're the 4th news network, and Bree Camelucci and Michael Berland put that ad together along with TYT's Army Director Allison Hartzin, and our amazing TYT production team. So if you want to check out their work or sign up to become a volunteer, go to tyt.com/army. There's so many different ways that you guys can get involved. And just like a political campaign, a donation makes a giant difference because it helps maintain the show and get our message out to more and more people and get stronger and fight back against not just the fascists that are in charge like Trump, but we got a giant fight against the establishment coming up. So that's tyt.com/go, as you guys know. Let's take a real quick look at the thermometer here. I think we have it now. It's a 60,000, 365. We're trying to get to 200,000. So anything you guys can do to help would be amazing. Just to get to 61,000 before the break would be fantastic. But if you want to volunteer instead, tyt.com/army. And obviously we love the work that they're doing. All right, speaking of participation, a third way is through comments if you're a member. So let me go to the member section. Raksharuk writes in, Bolivia fights the right wing and wins. We have that story coming up in a little bit, so stay right here. Too strong for Democrats writes, the path Trump took is for a single sole reason, incompetence. Trump never worked a day in office, and in order to be a competent leader, he actually had to work, and especially quite hard in a pandemic. Totally right. Number one reason is incompetent. Even if he wanted to lead, he has no idea how, because he's just not bright enough and has never worked a day in his life. And finally, Theater Goddess says, as a person who's incredibly vulnerable to the virus, I've been out of the house for 3 aimless car rides and 1 doctor's appointment since mid-March. Because encouraging people to wear a mask, follow social distancing rules, and follow other CDC guidelines is, quote, too hard. Limiting the spread of this disease is relatively easy. Not being able to see your family, friends, coworkers, or people in general is hard. It's a great point by Theater Goddess, and thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being a member. tyt.com/join to become a member. But these great folks did it just by hitting the join button below if you're watching on YouTube. Andy Sobchik, Yolanda Prito, Jody Gouling, Lorna Curtis, Kettle Called Black, and Zebra Girl. And finally on Super Chat, Runner Girl said, I bought Will You Shut Up Man tank top. I ran around LA with mine. Great response from people. So shop tyt.com for that. It might even get more popular than TDR shirts, but I don't know if that's possible. All right, guys, Anna, you're back.
All right. Well, we still don't have another round of stimulus. Congress is still stuck on supposedly negotiating, but the Federal Reserve has taken some matters into its own hands, offering interest-free loans to some corporations while simultaneously offering up loans with interest and a shorter period of time for states and cities to pay those loans back compared to what they're offering to corporations. So this is a great piece that was written by a publication founded by David Sirota, the Daily Poster. Matthew Cunningham Cook writes about how Chevron, for instance, was able to borrow money at half the rate as Wisconsin, meaning the oil giant was effectively getting a government subsidy while state taxpayers were being offered a predatory rate. So the Fed's loan to Chevron is for 4.5 years at 0.9%. Compare that to Wisconsin's loan with an interest rate of 1.28% over 3 years. So they have to pay it back at a shorter period of time with a higher interest rate. Kentucky actually got an even worse loan deal. For instance, 2% is the interest rate, and they must pay back that loan in 3 years. And when New York City needed a loan from the Federal Reserve, the Fed offered 1.9% that had to be paid back in 2 years. They later offered 1.6% over 36 months. But the point here is, oil companies, banks, massive corporations, they get these interest-free loans. They have all this time to pay it back. But when it comes to municipalities, when it comes to states, when it comes to the very people who desperately need these loans in order to prevent job losses, they get these higher interest rates and they have to pay back in a shorter period of time. So the Fed has only purchased 2 bonds in its municipal liquidity facility, lending just $1.6 billion of the $500 billion of lending capacity it has. Instead of lending at the rate that it lends to banks, with the interest rate currently at 0, the municipal liquidity facility has offered loans of at least 1% for terms of 24 to 36 months. So, you might think that 1% isn't that big of a deal, but it is if it's a giant loan. And especially if you have to pay that giant loan back in a shorter period of time, that becomes much more of a burden for the municipalities and the states that rely on these loans in order to make ends meet, especially now that Congress has become so useless in providing another round of stimulus.
Okay, so let's break this down. The Federal Reserve can give at apparently any rate they like because they're printing money, and oftentimes for the banks they have, and including right now, 0% interest rate. So they just give the money to the banks to loan out to make money off of. Now, if you were an approved bank, That's a good racket. Okay, you know why? You're literally guaranteed money. It costs you nothing to get, and then you loan it out at a certain percentage. So there's almost no way of losing. Now, one of the excuses for that, and sometimes it's true, is look, I'm giving it to the banks for very little because they're facilitating it going to, for example, in the PPP to small businesses. And the government is not structured to find all those small businesses and to set up relationships with them right away. The banks are facilitating that, and for that, they're taking a little bit of a margin on the interest rate. Okay, I would put that on the sensible end of the spectrum, right? Okay, but if you're not in an emergency and you don't have to facilitate something like the PPP, then I'm still not sure why the banks get 0% interest. That makes no sense. By the way, if you don't know, the top Federal Reserve branch is in New York, and the New York Federal Reserve is run by the top banks in the country, which are in New York. So the Federal Reserve is run by the banks and gives the banks money at 0%. So when you look at it that way, it's actually not that surprising or confusing at all. What makes it confusing is the fact that the Federal Reserve can print basically public money and then use it for private interests. Well, that's deeply problematic and a giant problem we have to fix later. But now, when we come to this issue, I want to finish the analysis for you guys. They're then saying, okay, but we're gonna lend it to the banks at zero, not to facilitate something that the government, a bill that the government passed, but to give it to people in situations where they make a profit. But also now the Federal Reserve is just gonna give it straight to corporations. So they're giving to Chevron. Wait, then the banks aren't a middleman. Nobody's facilitating anything. Why is Chevron getting a better rate than municipalities, which is government to government? Arguably government to government, it's all the US government anyway, it's just the federal and the state, and sometimes the cities should be at a lower rate than you give to private corporations. There's no excuse at all, there's no facilitating or anything. And they're like, nah, yeah, but the government's owned by the big corporations. They give campaign contributions to the politicians and bribe them. So that's why we give them money for free. But if you're in a city or state government and the people that are affected are government workers like, cops and fire department and other teachers. No, we don't care at all. And we're gonna charge you a higher rate. And the higher rate ranges from, at the low end, 1.28%, as Anna told you, all the way up to 2%. And now that might seem like small numbers, but it winds up being hundreds of billions of dollars in interest alone that the cities and states have to pay back to the federal government that Chevron doesn't have to. That's insane.
No, it's absolutely insane. And states they're in such an awful position right now because Congress, again, I'm gonna keep repeating this, has failed to provide any type of economic relief. And as a result, many of these public workers have either already been laid off or their jobs are imminently at risk. They're imminently at risk of losing their jobs. And so it's so disgusting to see this activity happen time and time again. And I don't know, Cenk, it almost appears as though these free market capitalists aren't really a fan of the free market, because in a free market you don't have the Federal Reserve show up and be like, hey, yo, we're printing cash, interest free, while giving a middle finger to states and municipalities and all of the government workers who need these loans in order to remain employed as Congress fails to provide stimulus. I also want to just give you some specific details on how much money they could save on interest payments if the Federal Reserve were lending to states the same way they're lending to banks and corporations. So proponents say that if you do away with the interest rate for states, that would allow municipalities to avoid mass layoffs and also save $160 billion in annual interest payments they pay Wall Street firms on their past debt. According to a report from Action Center on Race and the Economy, that amount is enough to help 13 million families avoid eviction by covering their annual rent, or enough to provide all 31.5 million unemployed workers $600 a week in pandemic unemployment assistance for 8 weeks. Because remember, guys, yes, the federal government stepped in temporarily and provided a more robust unemployment insurance program, an additional $600 a week to individuals who have been unemployed as a result of the pandemic. But remember that states run their own unemployment programs and they need funding for that as well. States are in a real bad spot right now, and it's not just Democratic states. I know that's what the Trump administration would have you believe, but funny enough, the state of Florida reached out to the Trump administration. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, reached out to the Trump administration, was like, we need some state funding. We're in a lot of trouble. So this is negatively impacting Americans across the country. It's a failure of our federal government, certainly a failure of how the Federal Reserve arbitrarily decides to lend at interest-free loans for the powerful while screwing over states and municipalities, and also a failure of Congress because they haven't been able to pass the stimulus that average Americans need and states and municipalities need as well.
So funny enough, it turns out Republicans are in favor of defunding the police because remember, that's $160 billion a year that you're taking out of local governments. And one of the things that local governments fund are the police. And so you're taking that out and giving it back to the Federal Reserve, but Chevron doesn't have to, and other corporations don't have to. They pay a much smaller rate, which means they save collectively hundreds of billions of dollars. And Anna pointed out that's not free market capitalism at all. Look, we're consistent on this. We think that the government needs to step in, not every time, only when it's necessary. Right? It depends on the size of the job and what the job is. So I'm very much in favor of the PPP that went to small businesses, and it was a startlingly successful program, not because it kept small businesses in business, but because it was structured right to make sure they kept all their employees. So I'm in favor of that government program. I'm not in favor of government programs that just give away our money to the biggest corporations in the world. We're not reflexively pro-government, and it's in a more interesting dynamic than are you in favor of government or are you in favor of the markets? The answer is both, and it depends on the situation. But for right-wingers, they say no. Only the market. The government is not your friend. The government's terrible at everything except the cops, the fire department, the military, and all the other things that we love and helping Israel. Okay, but they're awful at everything else, and I don't want to give them a dime. And so I just believe in the free market. Well, what part of this is the free market? If you're a right winger, you should be more upset than the left wingers. Or you have no ideology at all, and you never believed anything that you said. The government just giving out tons of free cash to corporations is the least free market thing you could possibly do. And by the way, all this critique does not come from a progressive activist. It comes from a Federal Reserve commissioner. He's the one that brought out all this. He's the one that brought out the Chevron example and said, look, we're doing this, and I don't know why we're doing this. If you think it doesn't make sense, you're right, it doesn't make sense. And finally, the chicanery there that they do is, hey, we gave the Federal Reserve $500 billion that they could lend out to the real businesses in America. The multinational corporations we already took care of, the banks we already took care of, but this is for real businesses. $500 billion that they can give out in loans at low interest rates. But we only use 1.6 billion of it because we don't really care. We don't really want to help businesses. We want to only help the big businesses that bribe all of the politicians. So just be honest about it. That's exactly what's going on here. And among the reasons, unfortunately, to our great, great disappointment, America has become one of the most corrupt countries on earth because we legalize bribery.
When we come back from the break, we have the good news that I promised you guys. It's not good news for the it is good news for the United States, but the people of Bolivia luckily have been able to exercise their democratic process, and there's an important victory to share with you all. So we'll share that story and more when we return.
At TYT, we frequently talk about all the ways that big tech companies are taking control of our online lives, constantly monitoring us and storing and selling our data. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. It's possible to stay anonymous online and hide your data from the prying eyes of big tech. And one of the best ways is with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making your activity more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And it's also easy to install. A single mouse click protects all your devices. But listen, guys, this is important. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET and Wired magazine. So take back control of your life online and secure your data with a top VPN solution available, ExpressVPN. And if you go to expressvpn.com/TYT, you can get 3 extra months for free with this exclusive link just for TYT fans. That's expressvpn.com/TYT. Check it out today.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. One more announcement for you. October 20th, I believe that's tomorrow. Sankofa and Latino Community Foundation for Tu Musica, Tu Voz, Tu Voto, a virtual music event that is bringing together artists, comedians, activists, and community organizers to urge Latinx community to vote in this election. So watch it tomorrow here at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. So just tune into TYT and you'll be able to see it. And sorry for the horrific Spanish pronunciations from me. All right, going to go to the members. Leah Lay says, Cenk, is there a little jealousy there? Don't worry, there's enough Dragon Squad love to go around. Hugs. This so-called Dragon Squad, I don't know. We got to do something. Tug of war, battle of the network stars, something. But I want to see this Dragon Squad, okay? And thank you to these new members on YouTube who hit the join button below. Theo Medley, Hello Earth, Hayden Bogert III, James Alcalade, Jamie Jones upgraded, Jay-Z. Oh, Jay-Z's a member now, that's awesome. Thomas Gilchrist and Zafar Hadi. And by the way, Jay-Z is even spelled different. And I know it's not really Jay-Z, but it is Jay-Z of a sort. Anyway, you guys all make the Young Turks possible. It's because of you that we get to do this show. So do tyt.com/join if you're watching anywhere, or hit the join button below on YouTube. And then the Bond says, size medium women's shirts, please, and still waiting for the California prop recommendations. So we're gonna try to get you the prop recommendations. We'll tell the thugs at shoptyt.com about your specific request. They just heard it themselves. But Anna said there'd be good news, so I'll give you one piece of good news here from the audience. Tim Bryan on Super Chat said, my mom, dad, and sister all voted Democrat in Wisconsin early voting. All were Republican 4 years ago. Never thought I could flip them, but I did. You're awesome. That's what I mean by we do all of this together, and I love that you did that. And thank you to all of our Twitch followers too. Obi-Mom Kenobi's at it again. 968th sub to the channel, that's unreal. Jeff Waldorf, another great talk show host on the progressive side, gifted a sub to TimDad72, and Deep Space Monk gifted 5 subs. We love you guys on Twitch as well. All right, Anna.
All right, now for some good news. Bolivia just held its presidential election, and socialist presidential candidate Luis Arce has won that election, which is fantastic news, especially when you consider that there was a military-backed coup that took place last year. It was very much influenced by the Organization of American States, which is mostly funded by the United States, in an effort to oust Evo Morales. He fled the country and is now in Argentina. However, his economic minister, Luis Arce, decided to run in this race, and it's clear that he won. His opponents have conceded that he has won. And let me give you the details on this and fill you in on what this all means. So the independent counts showed that Arce had a little over 50% of the vote and roughly a 20-point advantage over centrist former president Carlos Mesa, who acknowledged defeat. Now, the formal official count had Mesa with only 41 to 39% lead over Arce, with 24% of the vote tallied on Monday. But those votes appeared to be largely from urban areas rather than the rural heartlands that have been the base of Evo Morales' support. Officials said final results could take days. Now, the interim president, funny enough, Janine Áñez, asked Arce to govern with Bolivia and democracy in mind. Okay, so let's stop right there. So this right-wing interim president was not democratically elected by the people of Bolivia. In fact, after the United States orchestrated a coup in Bolivia and ousted a very popular president and forced him to flee the country and go to Argentina, what did this right-wing intern government do? Again, not democratically elected. They went on to do unthinkable things to the indigenous community in Bolivia. They were incredibly cruel. The videos that circulated throughout the internet during the time immediately after the coup happened were absolutely disgusting, beyond disturbing. This woman and her interim government does not represent democracy, does not care about democracy. Our country that's now being led by a man who has made very clear that he has no interest in democracy. Donald Trump is doing anything and everything he can to rig this election in his favor by trying to dismantle the post office. He's tried to spread disinformation about our elections. It was his government, with the help of senators like Marco Rubio, that spread this ridiculous narrative about how Evo Morales was rigging the election in his favor. Okay, and as soon as he was ousted, the situation on the ground in Bolivia became much worse, and it's exactly what you would expect from a military or US-backed coup that uses the military in Bolivia to oust a popular leftist president, who, by the way, pulled about 20% of the country out of poverty because he believed in using Bolivia's natural resources to benefit the people of Bolivia as opposed to multinational corporations. So anyway, this is my long-winded way of saying it appears that democracy has actually won in Bolivia. And while I feel celebratory and many people on the left feel celebratory today, I do want to also note that, in Bolivia, the people are very cautious, knowing that there is some possibility that the United States might not react well to this news. But for the moment being, Luis Arce, who was Evo Morales's former economic minister, has been elected as the new president of Bolivia.
Okay, so first of all, there's this mythology that the right wing puts out and the United States government puts out, but is very much backed by the media in this country, that leftists are not popular in Latin America, South America, and the rest of the world. They only seize power through authoritarian means. Whenever there's a leftist government, they immediately go, well, that sounds authoritarian to us, I don't know, right? Meanwhile, as Anna pointed out, they're the ones who took over in a coup. I'm pretty sure that's far more authoritarian. And if Morales didn't win the election, why do we assume the right wing should hold office? The whole point was they said, we don't know who won the election. Okay, so why does the right wing get to do a coup? And when we tested the theory on whether they were popular through a thing we call an election, it turns out, no, the right wing is deeply unpopular in Bolivia. The left wing is very popular. It looks like, and that's why we had immediate concessions, that the leftists, in this case, won by over 20 points, an epic landslide. So is that going to stop the American media and the right wing in this country from intimating that leftists are not popular? No, they're gonna keep putting out the same propaganda because that's what they use to justify coups. And that's why in this case, calling it propaganda is not hyperbole or an analogy or a metaphor. It's very, very literal. They're doing propaganda. So, and what is the point? Why is the entire United States government, Democrats and Republicans? Democrats are right wingers a lot of times in these cases. Not all Democrats. Bernie Sanders wouldn't do it. That's why the rest of the corporate Democratic Party despise them. But Obama, Bill Clinton, etc. Why do they normally go along with this? Because the business interest in America would rather have the minerals and the natural resources for themselves. And why are the leftists popular? Because they say, hey, you know what? If it's Bolivian minerals or it's Venezuelan oil, well, the Bolivian people and the Venezuelan people should benefit the most. It doesn't mean you can't use an outside company. It doesn't mean that they can't make a profit, but it is the people's money. By the way, you know who agreed to that more as just as much as Evo Morales and Hugo Chavez? A politician we had in this country. Her name was Sarah Palin. She actually did something even more bold in Alaska, where she raised the prices on the oil companies extracting oil from Alaska. And with that money, she sent $2,000 checks to almost every citizen in Alaska. And that's why she had an 80% popularity rating. Because if you actually give people what is actually theirs, they like it. If you give it to a foreign government or foreign corporations, they don't like it. Wow, so surprising.
Right. And Cenk, one of the natural resources in Bolivia that multinational corporations have their sights set on is lithium, right? Especially when it comes to powering non-gas fueled cars. And so it's not just about oil. It's not just about the natural resources that we hear about over and over again when we hear about the US-backed coups of leftist leaders. It's also about lithium, and it's just hilarious to me that like the New York Times just regurgitated the narrative coming from the Organization of American States that Evo Morales did something awful and dictatorial. Now, in reality, what Evo Morales did is he ran for another term. There are term limits in Bolivia, but much like here in the United States, if you are, let's say, someone like George W. Bush, and there's some sort of issue with the election, you can turn to the Supreme Court and hope that the Supreme Court has your back, right? Something similar happened in Bolivia where he essentially worked through the courts, wanted to run for another term. He ran for another term, and the vote totals made it abundantly clear that he won that election. He won that election. But it didn't matter because all OAS needed to do, Organization of American States, was just claim that there was some election rigging, some weird inconsistencies. They didn't provide any evidence of that whatsoever, but it didn't matter. The New York Times just printed it. And shockingly enough, it took the Washington Post to investigate that story and find that there was absolutely no evidence of election rigging, and that what actually happened on the ground in Bolivia was a coup. And it harmed so many indigenous people in that country. It led to an incredibly undemocratic outcome where you have this right-wing, unelected person in charge. And for her to turn around and accuse someone who was democratically elected of possibly governing the country in an undemocratic way is hilarious. And I do want to note things were looking a little dire because they had postponed this election several times as a result of the pandemic. And so people were starting to worry that an actual democratic election wasn't going to be held, but luckily it was held. And now, Luis Arce has won that election. One other note: Janine Áñez's government, that's the interim government, tried to overturn many of Evo Morales' policies and wrench the country away from its leftist alliances. Newly installed electoral authorities barred Morales from running in Sunday's election, even for a seat in Congress, and he faces prosecution on what are seen as trumped up, meaning they're false, charges of terrorism if he returns home. Yeah. I mean, it's just
absurd. Yeah, so I know another guy who violated term limits, Michael Bloomberg. Has anyone removed him from the country? There's term limits in New York, and he ran for mayor again. And no one cared. Why? Because he's rich and he helps Wall Street and other corporations. You know why some of those tin pot dictators in the past were called banana republics, that they ran banana republics in Central America? It's because we invaded them over literal bananas. Like they were charging, the corporations wanted to pay less for bananas and give the people of those countries less money. That was a natural resource. And we invaded them and did coups against them because of that. It's our fault. And look, I want international independent observers in Bolivia and America, in every one of these countries, so that none of this happens. And if we have it that way and fair elections, the left will win easily. All right, post game, amazing stories, including Jeffrey Toobin, when we return. Thanks for listening to the full episode of the Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.